First John chapter number 4. And here, John is talking specifically to followers of Jesus, and he's talking about how their lives are to look and how they are to conduct themselves. He's talking to kind of guide them in this process, and then he starts talking about not sinning, which is not popular to talk about, but it's still true. Just because it's not popular does not mean that it's not true. So he talks about not sinning, but then he kind of shifts and starts to talk about love. And more specifically, how to love others, to love other people. And so it says in 1 John chapter 4, starting at verse 7, "Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love." Yikes! I'm going to read that one more time for good measure, because it's a little difficult to read, and I just want it to really sink in. It says, "Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins." What I love about God is that he does not ask us to do something that he has not been willing to do himself. He says we love because he loved us first. "Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. This is how we know that we live in him and he in us. He has given us his Spirit, and we have seen and testified that the Father has sent his Son to be the Savior of the world. If anyone acknowledges that Jesus is the Son of God, God lives in them and they in God. And so we know and rely on the love God has for us." God is love. Once again, it lets you know God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in them. At the risk of kind of oversimplifying what we just read, John is basically saying, if you don't love, do you even know God? Like, if you aren't showing love, do you even know God? Because he says, God is love. And there's this major classification that doesn't even happen here. John does not classify who we are to love. He just says to love. It's so important, because what I'm always tempted to do is I'm always tempted to love people based on classification. Classification of, do they love me? Are they easy to love? Do they deserve it? Do I feel like it? I'm always tempted to kind of classify my love that I give based on that. But John just straight up says, he says, no, you gotta love. Love. This is what we're so good at doing. We're good at loving people until they give us a reason not to. Right? Like, I'll love you until you give me a reason not to. I'll love you until you hurt me. I'll love you until you hurt somebody that I care about. I'll love you until you give me a reason not to. How many would be honest and say, yeah, I've kind of been there before. Like, I've loved somebody until they did something and then it was just gone. Like, this is what we like to do. It's kind of in our nature to love people until they give us a reason not to. Some of us even love ourselves until we mess up and we've given ourselves a reason not to love us. But you can't love others well if you don't first love yourself well. So we're so tempted to kind of love something or somebody until we're given a reason not to. But John says, no, he removes all of that, and he just says, if you're going to love like Jesus, love. If you're going to live like Jesus, love. Not just certain people, not just people that line up with your perfect idea of a person, not people that look like you, not people that dress like you, not people that act like you, not people that go to church with you. Love all people. because God is love. And if you do not love, do you even know God? And it's so heavy, and it's so complicated and against our common nature and our normal character. But John is saying, if you're going to say that you live as God lived, if you're going to say that you are a follower of Jesus, if you are going to say that you love, then you have to show it. It's not enough just to say that you love them, but you have to show it. You ever told somebody that you love them only to turn around and do something mean to them? You ever had somebody who told you they loved you only to turn around and stab you in the back? Because their words did not line up with their actions. And John says, if you love, if you say that you love, that's great. It's a good start. But if you say that you love, then you have to also show that you love. It's easy to say it, but you got to show it. So this morning I want to talk to you on the subject, if you know it, show it. If you know it, show it. Let's pray together. God, I thank you for today, and I just thank you for who you are in this place and for the love that you have for each and every one of us. Lord, I pray that you would be with each and every one of us today, that you would speak directly to our lives. I pray, Lord, that you would help each and every person in here today and joining us online, not to see and hear from me, but to see and hear from you. And I thank you for it today. Help us to apply what is spoken so that we can begin to live and love the way that you live and that you love. We thank you for it in Jesus' name. And everybody said, Amen. Now, how many of you guys remember this? How many of you remember what it was like to have to drive somewhere for the first time before we had navigation systems in our cars or on our phones? Anybody remember what it was like? See, some of us can testify. See, I didn't know how to get around anywhere, but thankfully, this thing called MapQuest came out, right? Like, driving around before MapQuest was impossible, but then MapQuest came out, and all my 20-somethings are like, Map what? MapQuest, is that a board game? No, so MapQuest was like this thing that you could go online and you could print out your directions, right? You had to know where you were going. If you wanted to find a Starbucks on the way, you're in trouble because you got to know where you're going. If you're going to stop at a Starbucks, you got to put it as point B, then C. Like, you have all these little things that you had to do. That's how it was. And I knew God loved me when MapQuest came out. I knew it because I first started driving in the year that MapQuest came out. Once MapQuest came out, it was cool. I was able to get around. And then I knew God loved me even more when I got a TomTom, which was a portable navigation system when I was going to college. Then we all now have it on our phones. So God is good. And the way that I know God loves me because of that is I am extremely directionally challenged. Like, it's so bad. If I ever ask you where something is, please just tell me, Google it. Do not say, oh, you go about 5 miles east, right? If you go east 5 miles, then you'll get there. Because I don't know what that means. I don't know where east is. I don't know where west is, north, south. I know north, south. But if it's like supposed to be this way, I don't know. So please don't ever say that because I'm so directionally challenged, I get lost very easily. But even though we have navigation systems now, it's still difficult driving around Atlanta because the road names have like 6 different names. I mean, have you noticed this? Like, you have Scenic Highway is also 124. Then Lawrenceville Highway is also Highway 29. Then Grayson Highway is also Georgia 20 or Loganville Highway. Or you just call it whatever you want to on the day because that's just what's going to happen. And then you have Highway 78, which is Atlanta Highway, it's Athens Highway, it's Highway 78, it's all these things. And Highway 78 is the reason that I left home one time when I was 16 and almost never made it back. And the truth is, I wasn't even allowed to drive on Highway 78, okay? I wasn't supposed to, but I did it anyways. And I didn't know, because like back then, Highway 78, they had like lane changes where in the morning, there were 3 lanes that were going this way. In the evening, there were 2 lanes going this way, and the other one was coming this way, and they had this box above it that had like a red X or a green arrow. It was craziness, like you don't know where you're going, and you're like having head-on collisions. So I wasn't supposed to drive on 78, but I did it because MapQuest told me to, and I was just following the directions. So I was going to meet my golf coach and a friend to play golf in the summer. And I printed off the directions to this golf course, and it got me to the golf course perfectly fine. Well, then I got ready to leave, and my golf coach is like, typical man fashion, right? He's like, those directions, don't use those. I got a better way. It's like, I got a better way. He said, the way that the direction is told, you don't go back home that way. He said, that's going to take you forever. Let me just tell you what to do. It's very simple. He said, if you go right out of the golf course, you'll get up to Highway 78, and you take a right. He said, in about 20 minutes, you'll know exactly where you're at, and you'll be able to get home. So I'm like, okay, cool. So I take a right out of the golf course, and I pull up to what I think is Highway 78. But the street sign says Atlanta Highway. So I just kept going straight. And I go straight, and it goes across into this subdivision, this unfinished subdivision. And I'm like, man, this is a weird cut through. Like, this is interesting. So I'm like driving through this subdivision that's undeveloped. It has like 2 houses. People probably thought I was coming to rob them or something, because like, who is driving through my neighborhood? And I get up, and I'm like driving in circles in this neighborhood trying to find an outlet on the other side. Finally, I'm like, okay, there is no outlet. I pull back up to the light. I was going to call my parents, but I wasn't supposed to be driving 78. So I called my golf coach. And I told him, I was like, hey man, I'm lost. And he said, what do you mean you're lost? I said, I'm sitting in a subdivision. He said, why are you in a subdivision? I said, because I don't know how to find Highway 78. And he said, well, what are you looking at right now? And I said, well, I'm looking at a street sign that says Atlanta Highway. He said, well, why didn't you turn? Well, you told me to turn onto Highway 78. And he said, Atlanta Highway is Highway 78. It's like real mean about it. I'm like, sorry. Like, how was I supposed to know? I'm not. So he was like, it's one and the same. Atlanta Highway is Highway 78. They're the same thing. They're one and the same. One is the other is the same. It is one and the same. And what I need you to see this morning as we start out is that God and love is one and the same. God and love is one and the same. John said in 1 John chapter number 4, in verse number 8, it says, whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. God is love. God is love, and love is God. They are one and the same. They are the same thing. You cannot have love without having God. You cannot have God without having love. They're one and the same. God is love. If you say that you love, then you have to have God. But if you say that you have God, but you do not have love, they're one in the same. They can't be separated. You can't separate the two. You can't pull out love or pull out God. They are one in the same. They are the same thing. The same thing. They are not two separate entities. They are the same thing. God and love are the same. They're the same. Because love is not a characteristic of God. Love is who God is, which means that it is his nature. It is his person. It is his identity. It is who God is. Which means that if we are followers of Jesus and he is in us, then love is to be our nature. It's to be our identity. It's to be who we are. It's to be our person. It's to be who we are. Because you cannot separate the two. If you have God in you, then you have his nature in you. And his nature is love. So if you're going around telling people that you're a follower of Jesus, but then you're like cussing them out when they make you angry, it's no wonder they don't want anything to do with God. Because in their minds, God is to be love, and what you just did is not love. God is love. And if we are going to live the life that God has called for us, if we're going to be who God has called us to be, if we're going to be followers of Jesus, then it requires us to love. Because if you know God, then you love, because God is love. God is love. And the two cannot be separated. They cannot be separated. You can't have God and not have love. And you can't have love and not have God. They're one and the same. They're the exact same thing. And it's so contrary to the way that we think and the way that we live and the way that we act, because a lot of times we're like, man, as long as I got God, I'm going to heaven. But God says, do you really know me if you're not living your life on earth in love? Said, whoever does not love does not know God. But do I have to love that person? Like, I don't think you understand, God. Like, this person is awful. This person is terrible. Like, they're the worst person. Do I have to? Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. Somebody say, God is love. God is love. It's not an if, it's not a maybe, it's not if I feel like it. It's God is love. We love because God loved us. We love because God is love. It's a cause and effect. That's the next thing I need you to see if you're taking notes. It's a cause and an effect. We love because God loved. It said in verse 11, dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. We love others because God loved us. We love others because God loved us. God loved us, that's the cause. So we love others, that's the effect. If you truly understand the nature of God, He loved us, which is the cause, so now we love others, which is the effect that should have on us. It says that we ought to love one another. We ought to. Notice what it doesn't say, because see, sometimes what God doesn't say is just as important as what He says. It does not say, love the ones who love you. It doesn't say, love the ones who help you. It doesn't say, love the ones who agree with you. It doesn't say, love the ones that look like you, love the ones that you like. It just says, love one another, period. Love one another. And it's so important because we like to put designations with it. Well, I tried to love them, but it wasn't reciprocated. You ever been in that before? Like I've held the door open for somebody before. One time, this is a true story. One time I was at a Goodwill and I held the door open for this lady who was trying to, why is that funny? I wasn't at Walmart at least, okay? Close second. But I'm at Goodwill and I'm holding the door open for this lady to walk in. That's all. I mean, that's just what I do. It's how my parents raised me. I'm holding the door open. So I held this door open. Lady comes to walk through, and she's like, I can get my own door, thank you. I'm like, true story, like, just like this. I'm just smiling, you know. I get my own door, thank you. I want to be like, all right. I mean, that's what you said. Like, you can get your own door. That's what I wanted to do. But instead, I was just like, okay, I'm sorry. Like, it was very awkward. I don't know what to do. Do I close the door now, like, in your face? Do I say, oh, I'm sorry, I'll remember that in future reference when I never see you again? Like, what do I do here? But in that moment, because you ever had a time where you did something nice for someone and it wasn't reciprocated? You ever done something nice for someone and it wasn't appreciated and it kind of came back in your face? In those moments, it's so easy to be like, well, God, I tried to love them. God, I tried to make amends with the person that hurt me 10 years ago. I tried, but it wasn't reciprocated. Doesn't say I love those who reciprocate it. It just says I love. That means we love those even when they don't reciprocate. Then we'll try to be like, well, you know, God, I would love them, but I don't even think you would love them. Like, nobody can love this person after what they did to me. You don't understand, God, all the things that they did. Even you wouldn't really love them. No, it says love one another, period. Love one another, period. Or then it's like, you know, God, I would love them, but they think Michael Jordan was better than Kobe Bryant. You want to get a door slammed in your face? Tell me that Kobe wasn't the greatest of all time. It's like, God, I would love them, but they don't agree with me. I would love them, but I don't like the way that they're thinking. God, I would love them, but they're not lining up with what I want to love. They're not lining up with how I want. And we put all these conditions on love that's supposed to be unconditional. We put all these things, we put all this into a box. We put our love into a box of how we're willing to use it. And God tells us through John, he says, no matter what they did to you, no matter how they affected your life, no matter what they said or what they did, love. No matter how they look at you, love. No matter how they act towards you, love. That means that you should love the person that left you. You should love your best friend that betrayed you. You should love your ex that cheated on you. And watch this, you should love the person that they cheated with. Yikes. It's like, what? It's like, hey, I was tracking really good. And then you just went there. But listen, I'm not saying it. I mean, I really am not. Like, I told our worship and operations pastor this week, Torrin, I was like, man, this series is jacking me up. I don't even want to get out there and preach it because everybody's going to look at me like I'm crazy. But it's saying, if you love, then you know God. But if you do not love, do you even know God? Do you even know God? So you got to love all people. Love your family that turned their back on you. Love all people. There's no classification. I wish that there was. Can I be honest? Like, I wish that it said, love the ones that are nice to you, that give you high fives, that give you $1,000, you know, like, love those people. Great. But you don't have to love the ones that hurt you. You don't have to love the ones that upset you. You don't have to love the ones that betrayed you. You don't have to love those people. I wish that it said that. Like, I'm just going to be honest. I'm just going to say that because most pastors are not going to say that. I wish there were some classifications on this thing called loving the way that God loved. But there's not. And what we do way too often is we try to twist the Bible to fit our preferences. And we try to find loopholes in the Bible that fit our preferences. So we try to say, well, maybe it just meant that for this time. No, God said to all followers, if you are to live as I live, then you will love. No loopholes, no changes. That's how it is. That's how it is. If we're going to live the life that God has called us to live, if we're going to be who God has called us to be, then it requires us to love everyone. Everyone. That means the person that cut you in line. Everyone. Everyone. Now, it does not say that you have to hang out with them. It says you got to love them. And I think this is so important. Nowhere does it say that you have to hang out with everyone, but it says that you need to love everyone. And it's so important because people are to be loved biblically. They're to be equal in the way that we treat them, but they're to be managed differently. We need to love them biblically, but we need to manage differently. We got to learn how to manage our relationships. Because for some of us, the more we hang around someone, the less we love them. Like, if you can't hang around somebody and continue to love them the way God's called you to love them, you don't need to be hanging out with them. Be like, I love you, now I'm going to go hang out over here. Because the more that you allow somebody else to try to pull at you and try to pull you down and try to nag you, then it causes you to stumble in your love walk. So we got to learn how to manage our relationships, but we have to love each and every person. We have to love all people. And I'll be honest, it's hard to love all people. It's hard to love everyone. Like, if you don't think it's hard to love everyone, just get on social media for like 5 minutes. 5 minutes, all it takes. I mean, it's amazing to see how much hatred there is out there. And what's even more so amazing is how we fall for it and get suckered into it and start to engage in it ourselves. Because it's not easy to love all people. It's not easy. Especially in today's time, like, people are mean. People are mean. Like, people will send anonymous messages. They'll send anonymous emails. They'll say things that are hurtful towards you. But if we are going to live the way that Jesus called us to live, as followers of Jesus, we're to constantly be growing to another level in our walk. And you know that you've grown when you can let it go. You know that you've grown when you can see something on social media and guess what? Just keep swiping. I don't have to engage in that. They voted for who? I don't care. Wasn't my vote. I'm going to keep on scrolling. They think this. Doesn't matter. It's not my thought. I'm going to keep scrolling. You know you've grown when you can scroll past. You know that you've grown when you can see people who have hurt you in the past and continue to love them and move beyond it. Continue to move on. Be like, yeah, man, how you doing? It's so good to see you. See it. It's not hard to be cordial. Nobody said you had to sit down and have a picnic with them. But if you see somebody that hurts you, you don't like walk up to them and slap them and say you don't want to. I just say you don't do it. It's like, oh, hey. Like we walk in Kroger. Hey, good to see you. Okay. Love you. With the love of the Lord. Don't tell them that's weird. They'll be like, what? The what? But it's like, you know that you've grown when you can see somebody that hurt you so deeply. See, we try to say God changed our lives. The word change, that I'm a new person. And then the devil will bring somebody in right there. From back in the day. They were the reason you needed Jesus. And he'll bring them right back to you. And it's that test of, you know what? I've grown past this. Yeah, you hurt me. Yeah, I'm still kind of recovering from it a little bit, but I've outgrown that hurt. I've allowed the love of God in my heart to become bigger than the pain of what you did to me. Is what somebody did to you stronger than the love of God? Is the pain somebody caused you stronger than the love of God? Is the hurt that somebody brought about your life stronger than the love of God? Because God's love covers it all. God's love covers it all. And as followers of Jesus, we have to be striving to that other level of growth. Anyone in your life who has control over your emotions, over your mental state, over your attitude, is an idol. Anyone that the moment that you see them, the joy of the Lord is no longer your strength, they're an idol. They're an idol. See, idols aren't always good things. We always think like, oh, yeah, that person that I love, I'm not going to let them be an idol. I'm not going to let my house be an idol. I'm not going to let my bank account be an idol. But sometimes idols are the things that hurt us the most. And we've made an idol out of them because we allowed them to reign supreme over him. Anything in your life that can cause your view of God's love to be diminished is an idol, and it has to go. It has to go. It cannot remain in your life. You got to learn to let those things go. And please do not make me bust out singing Let It Go, because I have a 2-year-old and I already hear it enough. But you got to let the things go. See, I'm not even going to preach anymore because now everybody's just singing the song in your head. But you got to learn the things in your life that hurt you, that the betrayal, and it was painful. And I'm not saying you run back into that situation. But you got to say, I love them. I don't understand how. I don't know how. I don't want anything to do with them, but I love them. And go on. Go on. Because when it comes to God and his love, it is what it is. It is what it is. And what I mean by that is either it's love or it's not love. It's God or it's not God. If it is love, then it is God. If it is not love, then it is not God. And that's the last thing I need you to see, is that it is what it is. It said in verse 16, and so we know and rely on the love God has for us. God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in them. God is love. So if you live in love, then you live in God. If you live your life in love, then you live your life in God. And what that means is that your words and your thoughts and your actions are love. Every single facet of your life is love. I don't want to. It's not about what you want. It's about what it is. If it is God, it is love. If it is not love, then it is not God. Because God is love. So in our words and in our actions, it said, whoever lives in love lives in God. Which means that if you don't live in love, you can't be living in God. Because God is one thing. God is love. So if you do not live in love, there's only one other option. There's only one other option. It says, if you live in love, you live in God. And to live in love, it cannot be based on conditions. Because for many of us, we are being held back in our jobs. We're being held back in our marriages. We're being held back in our relationships because we cannot get to the point where our love is not conditional. We cannot get to the point where our love is not based on conditions. So we're being held back in all these places because all we want to do is just allow our love to be conditional. Like, I'm giving you my love as a gratitude to you. I'm giving you my love because you deserve it. No, God says you got to show love regardless. Show love no matter what. And this is what I've always told myself to make me feel better. I've always told myself, well, you know what? It's okay because I'm not Jesus. Right? It's okay not to love them because I'm not Jesus. It's okay not to want anything to do with them because I'm not Jesus. Like anybody, like it's like, man, I want to love them, but I'm not Jesus. I want to love them, but they did this thing to me. I want to love them, but they hurt me. And it's what I always use for my excuse, but let me tell you why that's wrong. Because as followers of Jesus, we are to live as Jesus did. As followers of Jesus, we're to live life the way that Jesus lived life. And in 1 John chapter 2, verse number 6, it says, whoever claims to live in him must live as Jesus did.
That's right.
Whoever claims to live in him must live as Jesus did. But continue on with me. Romans 5:8. It says, while they were yet sinners, Christ loved us enough to come and die for us. So whoever claims to live in him must live as Jesus did. What did Jesus do? Came down to this earth while we were yet sinners, came down to this earth and died for us. That means if you are going to truly live in love, the greatest sacrifice that Jesus could have ever made, the greatest action step, the greatest action of love and service and sacrifice that he could have ever made to show his love, he did, even though he knew that we would never deserve it. He did it even though he knew that we would never be able to get it right all the time. He did it even though he knew that we would not always be where we needed to be in him. God loved us enough to come and die regardless. And if that's not enough for you, I'll take it to another step. Follow this. It says that Jesus was betrayed by his disciple Judas. He was betrayed by his disciple Judas. And it says that his disciple Judas betrayed him to death. Betrayed him to death. Like, imagine this. Your person that you rely on, that you depend on, your friend, betrayed you to die? I mean, how many has that happened to? Not me. No, it's happened to some, not me. But you know what Jesus did anyways? He washed the feet of all the disciples. Well, maybe Jesus didn't know. No, Jesus knew that Judas had betrayed him to death. But Jesus said, you know what? I'm going to wash the feet of every disciple. If it had been me and they all lined up, when I got to Judas, I'd put a closed sign. Closed. Sticky feet not welcome. Like, no. No. But Jesus washed the feet of every single disciple. Picture this for a moment. The man who had betrayed Jesus to die on the cross comes up to have his feet washed by Jesus, by the one he had betrayed. And Jesus showed so much love unconditionally that he was able to say, you know what? Here, let me see your feet. Washed them just like everybody else. Treated Judas the same way he treated Peter, the same way he treated Matthew, the same way he treated every single disciple that had his back. Jesus looked at the very one who had betrayed him to the deepest hurt, and he served him the same way. Because if you say that you live in love, the greatest way to show it is to be able to serve somebody who hurt you. If you say that you live in love, are you willing to serve the very one that hurt you the deepest? Are you willing to serve the one who hurt you the most? Because if you say that you live in love, then it requires that you love unconditionally, that you love all people. See, we as a church need to get to the place where we show unconditional love, where we show unconditional love in our actions. See, not just in our words. Like, we could say that we love people. Some of us need to tell our face that we love people. Some of us, our greatest action of I don't love you is our face. Some of us need to tell our face, hey, I love people, not like, I love people, I love you. Welcome to church. Good to see you. No, like, I love you. I love people. That's why I love Elevation Point Church. It's weird for some people because, like, so many people are huggers, and it's a little bit, it's like, oh, no, okay, well, you know, flu's going around. But what I love is that there's so many people that have a genuine love for people that when they come through the door, they're excited to see them. They're so glad that they're here, and that's the way it should always be. We should love people enough to want to serve them. We should love people enough to want to invite them to church. We should love people enough to want to serve on Sunday morning in the tech team, on the worship team, in the children's area, in the children's area, in the children's area, in the children's area, on the parking team, on the parking team. These are the areas that I'm really pulling for. Parking team. We should love. It's too cold to have to stand out there and tell people good morning. It's too cold. I love people, but not that much. I love people, but not their kids. Well, if you got kids, then you obviously must love kids. Just leave that there. But do we love enough to say, you know what, I want to serve. I want to serve people. I want to serve people. Because Jesus loved, and in his love, it wasn't about being served, it was about serving. And if we're going to say that we love people, we got to serve in such a way, love in such a way that we serve and say, I want it to be excellent. When people show up, I want them to know exactly where to park in the parking lot. It's a big parking lot. I want them to know if they have kids, they can park over here on the side. When their kids get here, you know what? I want to be back there waiting to hold them, to be able to teach them about Jesus because they need Jesus too. I want to be a part of loving others in a capacity so much that it gets beyond just me. Because many of us, we say that we love others, but we're not willing to sacrifice for others. We say that we love others, but we're not willing to do things for others. But Jesus said, you know what? If you say that you love, then you show. If you say that you know God, then you'll show love. If you know it, then you'll show it. If you know me, then you'll show love. If you're able in this place, you can stand this morning. God said it's not enough just to say that we love people, but we have to show that we love people. Even the ones that are not easy to love. Even the ones that we don't want to love. Because if we know God, then we show love. But if we don't show love, do we even know God?